In the American Revolution, the most uncomfortable truth is that millions of people living in the colonies did not choose rebellion, and many actively chose Britain. They were called Loyalists, and in a war about liberty, they became the neighbors labeled as traitors. If you want to understand how fragile independence really was, you have to understand why so many Americans believed staying British was safer, smarter, or even more moral. Because a revolution is never just patriots versus an empire. It is also families versus families, towns versus towns, and fear versus hope. The Loyalists were not a single type of person, and that is the first myth to break. Some were wealthy merchants tied to British trade and credit, and they saw independence as an economic suicide mission. Some were farmers who simply wanted stability because war meant soldiers taking food, burning barns, and turning a normal year into a disaster. Some were government officials, judges, clergy, or customs workers who had built their lives inside the imperial system and believed order mattered more than radical change. Some were recent immigrants who had come for opportunity and did not feel connected to revolutionary ideology. Some were deeply religious people who believed rebellion against a lawful king was morally wrong and that obedience was a spiritual duty. And some were people who disliked local patriot elites and believed a new, free government would just become a new local tyranny. To them, Britain was not only a distant authority, it was also a symbol of law, courts, and a predictable system that protected property and contracts. Imagine living in a world where your savings, your land title, and your trade depend on rules written in London. And then being told to gamble all of it on a brand new experiment. Revolutionary speeches can sound heroic, but when you have children to feed, heroism can feel like a luxury. So many Loyalists were not pro-British in a patriotic sense. They were pro-survival, pro-stability, and pro-avoiding civil collapse. Also, early in the conflict, it was not clear the Patriots would win, and betting on Britain looked like betting on the strongest team in the world. Britain had the navy, the money, and professional armies, while the colonies had shortages, uneven training, and a political coalition that could break at any moment. If you believed Britain would eventually restore control, then openly resisting patriots could feel like protecting your future. This is why loyalism often grew strongest, where British power felt close, such as port cities, major trade centers, and areas exposed to British troops. New York became a loyalist stronghold, partly because British forces held it for much of the war. And people adapt to whoever controls the streets. But loyalism also existed in the countryside, where social pressure was intense and the safest position could be silence. And that brings us to another overlooked point. Many loyalists tried to stay neutral until neutrality became impossible. In civil conflicts, neutrality looks like betrayal to both sides, and you can be punished for not cheering loudly enough. Patriot committees watched neighbors, demanded oaths, and treated political loyalty like a public performance. Sometimes that pressure created loyalists, because people who were undecided began to resent being forced. Once the war escalated, both sides used propaganda to claim the moral high ground. And loyalists were painted as enemies inside the walls. Patriots warned that loyalists would invite tyranny, sabotage the war, and sell the country back to a king. Loyalists warned that patriots were extremists who would destroy property, break society, and replace British order with mob rule. If you read accounts from the time, you feel the fear underneath the words, because both sides believed the other could end their entire way of life. For Loyalists, the revolution threatened their jobs, their safety, and their social position, and sometimes it threatened their very identity as British subjects. For Patriots, Loyalists threatened unity, and unity was the only thing standing between them and defeat. That is why the revolution produced measures that look harsh, including property seizures, public shaming, exile, and imprisonment. Many Loyalists had their land confiscated, their businesses disrupted, and their reputations destroyed. And those losses lasted generations. Some fled early to British-held areas for protection, turning cities like New York into crowded refuges filled with desperate families. Others stayed and tried to keep their heads down, hoping the storm would pass. But war has a way of finding people anyway. Now we have to talk about the hardest dimension, because it shows how complex choosing Britain could be. For many enslaved people, the British offered a path to freedom, and that promise pulled some toward the crown for reasons that had nothing to do with loving empire. When your daily life is bondage, the side that offers escape can look like the side of liberty, even if that side is an imperial army. Some enslaved people joined British forces, served as guides, workers, or soldiers, and risked everything for the chance to break chains. Their story complicates the easy narrative because it shows that patriot freedom did not automatically mean freedom for everyone. Native nations faced their own brutal choices, and many saw the expanding American frontier as a greater threat than Britain. For some native communities, supporting Britain was a strategy to slow colonial expansion and protect land, even though British promises were also imperfect. So loyalism was not only a political stance, it was often a survival strategy in a world where every option carried danger. Still, loyalists did fight, and their military role mattered more than people think. There were loyalist regiments that fought alongside British forces, did raids, gathered intelligence, and helped control territory. In a war where information and local knowledge were priceless, loyalists could provide maps, contacts, and understanding of local terrain. That made patriots even more suspicious, because the enemy might not be a stranger, it might be the person who knows your roads and your routines. This fear helped fuel harsh treatment on both sides. And once fear turns into policy, reconciliation becomes difficult. By the late war years, the conflict had hardened identities, and people began to think of victory as a matter of survival, not just politics. Then came the endgame, and this is where the Loyalist story becomes one of the biggest migrations in early American history. When Britain lost, many Loyalists faced a simple question: stay in the new United States and hope for forgiveness, or leave everything behind and start over. Tens of thousands chose to leave, and their evacuation reshaped places like Canada, the Caribbean, and even Britain itself. Many went to Nova Scotia and what became New Brunswick, helping to build new towns and new political cultures that still carry Loyalist memory today. Others went to Quebec, to the Bahamas, to Jamaica, and to other parts of the British world, carrying trauma, skills, and anger with them. Imagine losing your home because your neighbors won a war, and then trying to rebuild your life in a colder land with fewer resources and a different society. Britain sometimes offered compensation for confiscated property, but compensation rarely matches the emotional weight of a lost home. And for Loyalists who stayed, life could be complicated, because even after the war, suspicion can linger longer than gunpowder smoke. Some Loyalists reintegrated, changed their public identity, or simply stayed quiet. And over time, their descendants blended into the new nation. But the Loyalist experience left a lasting imprint on American politics, because it taught early leaders a painful lesson about internal division. It helped shape ideas about loyalty, treason, and what the new nation owed to dissenters. It also reminds us that the people were never unanimous, and that the revolution was not a clean national awakening, but a contested civil struggle. When modern Americans argue about patriotism, protest, and national identity, they are often echoing the same tensions that Loyalists and patriots fought over. So here is the key takeaway. Loyalists were not simply cowards or villains. They were people making choices under pressure with limited information. Some chose Britain to protect wealth, some chose Britain to protect order, some chose Britain because they feared patriot rule, and some chose Britain because it offered a path out of slavery. That does not mean every Loyalist cause was noble, because some defended hierarchy and injustice, and some profited from empire. But it does mean the story is human, and human stories are rarely pure. If you reduce Loyalists to one stereotype, you miss the real drama of 1776, which is that independence was not a shared certainty, it was a contested decision. And if independence was contested, then victory was even more uncertain, because internal division can destroy a revolution faster than an external enemy. In a strange way, Loyalists prove the revolution was real, because only real revolutions split societies this deeply. They also force us to ask a difficult question. If you lived then, with your job, your family, and your safety on the line, what would you have chosen? That question is not meant to shame anyone. It is meant to break the illusion that history is easy when you already know the ending. Because the people in 1776 did not know the ending, and many of them made the most reasonable choice they could see: So when America 250 is celebrated, the honest celebration should include the full complexity, including the Americans who did not want independence at all. If you want, I can also make a version of this script with the same sentence count, but even more dramatic hooks per section for higher retention. And if you want more history that cuts through myths and explains the people on every side, like the video and subscribe to History Refuge.